beautiful, colorful meadow, and in that meadow is a single fly. And it's a black fly. And in that meadow, he describes that fly as being one that is simultaneously at peace and forgotten. And it's such an exquisite way of describing himself in his love for Abdullah. But the reason why I wanted to talk about Ata ibn Shaddad is because he acts as a very powerful, almost like foil for how blackness was in Arabia before Islam, and the ways in which blackness transformed and transcended the kind of ways it was put down in pre-Islamic Arabia after Islam. Because Ata ibn Shaddad, he was born a slave to his own father. And his own father refused to acknowledge him until Antara basically showed himself as the greatest of all his people, and only then would his father acknowledge him. And in contrast to this, I remember we said we were going to talk about Al-Ata, right? In contrast to this is a story of Ata. If you could give us a summary of that story and why that's such a powerful contrast.
So, I'm going to be selfish. As much as people came here to listen to me talk and they enjoy me talking, I enjoy hearing from you. So I'll start and then I'll return it to you, because I want you to narrate the story of Ata and Abdul Malik bin Marwan. But in order to give context to the story, Ata ibn Abi Rabah was an enslaved African man who was in Mecca just in the generation after the Prophet ﷺ. So he was not a Sahaba, but he was a Tabi or a Tabi. And at that time, he was blessed to study with some of the most eminent Sahaba, all of the famous names that we know from the Sahaba who narrate ahadith and who were scholars of fiqh and, fuqaha in the generation of the Prophet ﷺ and immediately after. Ata, who came into Mecca as an enslaved African man or an enslaved black man, was able to study, and he gathered so much knowledge and he was so respected that eventually he was freed. And the Khalifa at the time had heard about his knowledge, and it was said that he was the most knowledgeable person in Mecca. And so in being the most knowledgeable person in Mecca, the Khalifa appointed him as the Mufti of Mecca. He was the highest spiritual and religious authority in the city of Mecca. And he went on Hajj more than 70 times. He had a very, very long life. He died well into his hundreds. And he was known as somebody who was extremely no-nonsense. Because of his knowledge, because of his status, it was said that no one was allowed to give fatwa when Ata was in Mecca. So if anybody had any religious questions, and the scholars were receiving guests, and somebody asked them for a fatwa, is this halal, is this haram, can we do this, can we not do this? It wasn't like today when everyone goes on TikTok and wants to shoot their own fatwas and they can't even recite the Fatiha with makharij. But that's another story for another time. They said, no, we can't give fatwa if Ata is in Mecca. Go and find Ata ibn Abi Rabah. If he gives the fatwa, then take it. And if he's not present, then I'll come back to me and I'll give you my answer. So that's how respected he was in society. But when I mention him being no nonsense, is because he was respected to the point where, and we have this tradition, unfortunately, we have scholars for dollars. We have scholars who, even though they've memorized the Quran and they've mastered the Islamic tradition and they have a lot of knowledge, they will use their knowledge in service of oppressive regimes and oppressive governments. They will use their knowledge in order to gather authority amongst the people and then be quiet in the face of corruption, or be quiet in the face of oppression, and not speak up or not speak out to leaders and leadership when they're not acting according to the Quran and the Sunnah. But Ata was not one of those people. He did not fear the government, he did not fear the Sultan, he did not fear worldly authorities, and he was known as somebody who used to speak truth to power in that context. And if you think about the fact that society is based on a class system and a caste system, essentially, with slaves being at the bottom of that system, the fact that this man could rise from being somebody that came into the city as enslaved and then became the greatest religious authority in the greatest city in the world and in the Islamic world, that was a very, very extreme case of the equality and the status that Islam gives people, and the manifestation of the saying of the Prophet ﷺ, a practical manifestation that there is no fadl, there's no excellence of an Arab over a non-Arab, or over black over a white, illa bitaqwa, except through the consciousness and the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so you will tell us the story of him. No, go ahead, bismillah. Wallahi, go ahead, I want to hear you narrate it.
So there's this moment where Abdul Malik bin Marwan, right, has Ata come to him, or rather he's in Mecca and he's asking for advice from Ata. This is a long tradition amongst rulers, right, where they would have the greatest of the scholars come and say, give me wa'adh, give me nasiha. And so he asks Ata to give him nasiha. And Ata gives him, by giving him nasiha, he slaps him in the face. Because at this time, Abdul Malik bin Marwan is at war with Abdullah ibn Zubayr. Abdullah ibn Zubayr, who was one of the children who was born in Medina at the time of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abdullah ibn Zubayr, who was kissed by the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abdullah ibn Zubayr, who was the Sayyid of all of the Sahaba. And Abdullah ibn Zubayr, who united the remainder of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een against Abdul Malik bin Marwan because of the injustice that was being perpetrated by the Banu Umayyah. And Abdullah ibn Zubayr sent Hajjaj bin Yusuf to Mecca, and Hajjaj bin Yusuf used catapults on Mecca to the point where some of them were almost hitting the Kaaba. And he defeated Abdullah ibn Zubayr and he hung him in the middle of Mecca and said, anybody who cuts him down will be killed. And people who wanted to gain favor with Hajjaj, they started playing with the lips of Abdullah ibn Zubayr radiallahu anhu as he was hanging in Mecca. And some of the people said to them, don't do that to the lips of Abdullah ibn Zubayr, because by Allah we saw the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam kissing them. This is the backdrop of where Abdul Malik bin Marwan is asked Ata to come and give him nasiha. And what he says to him is, be good and kind and don't be cruel to the descendants of the Muhajirin and the Ansar. What he's saying to him is, what you did to Abdullah ibn Zubayr was unconscionable. What you did to the Sahaba and the Tabi'een was entirely unacceptable. And from now on, you're not going to take revenge on anyone. This is a freed slave, a black man, sitting before the most powerful king in the world of the time, and telling him, you will not harm any more of the people of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what is the response of Abdul Malik bin Marwan? Does he become enraged? Does he become incensed? How can this freed slave speak to me like this? No. He accepts what he says. Because he knows that in the eyes of the people, the Khalifa has less legitimacy. The Khalifa has less authority. The Khalifa has less love and care and affection than the freed slave who is sitting in front of him. And that is why Ata to me is such a foil for Antara ibn Shaddad. Antara ibn Shaddad needed to defeat an entire tribe to be acknowledged by his own father. And Abdul Malik bin Marwan needs Ata to be acknowledged by his own subjects. And that's the power of Islam. And inshallah, we'll continue this after.
See, he told that story way better than I could have. MashaAllah.
And inshallah, we will continue this after Salatul Isha. So if we can get some help in putting the barriers back, inshallah, in resetting the musalla as it's supposed to be, and we will give adhan, inshallah.
They're different. iPad. Can you get it? Can you tell Hasib to get the iPad? iPad. Why did you use this? Not supposed to use it. It should be okay. No, it's not. It is very different. Very different settings.